lot of times on this show, I will try and highlight a special little piece of artistry when a movie gets adapted into a book, like the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle movie adaptation. But in most cases, the very nature of making an adaptation in comics is just a quick cash grab, and not much care is given to when making the final product, like Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 movie comic. Today it's going to feel like it's one of those, but we'll see. Today on Graphic Adaptations, we are going to look at a movie from 1989 and the 2-issue Dark Horse adaptation that was published of James Cameron's The Abyss. Now, I wanted to do a full run-through of the plot of this movie because, I assume everybody's seen it, right? It came out 35 years ago, so why care about spoilers? Well, because 35 years ago, not everybody would have been able to see this movie or did see this movie, and many, many people now weren't alive back then, so while I'm going to talk about this movie, I'm also going to selectively avoid certain parts so that you get to enjoy the movie as intended if you get the magnificent privilege of seeing it for the first time. Because while this is indeed a movie about an underwater deep-sea oil driller and his life being turned upside down when his ex-wife comes aboard, it's also got layers. It's got Cold War intrigue with a team of Navy SEALs that carry a nuke and the promise of aliens or something supernatural down there. The cast is superlative. Ed Harris is our crew leader. His ex is played by Mary Elizabeth Mastrantonio, who was Maid Marian in Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and was Costner's love interest in Tony Scott's Revenge. Tony Scott's Revenge is badass. Don't watch the director's cut. That's a subject for another video. Michael Biehn, in one of his 3 best roles of his career, is in it. Kyle Reese from Terminator, Johnny Ringo from Tombstone, and this movie. Maybe Hicks from Aliens can tie with Terminator. I don't think those are the juiciest roles for him as an actor, but man, watching him lose his shit in The Abyss is incredible. It should have got him an Oscar, hands down, easily, no doubts. Now, there is a weird parallel with Michael Bay's Armageddon here, the roughneck crew of drillers being commandeered by the military to run a mission outside their comfort zone that could benefit humanity greatly. Ed Harris and Bruce Willis are our grumpy old bald leaders, and there's this romance in both of the movies and big sacrifices that get made. But one of the differences that make Armageddon a Hollywood blockbuster and The Abyss into a more grounded and realistic and an engaging story, in my opinion, is that the rest of the crew in Armageddon are a who's who of celebrity characters like Owen Wilson and Michael Clark Duncan and Steve Buscemi, whereas Cameron's Abyss crew, they look like he just found them already working on these subs. There's a real authenticity to that.
You guys ain't so tough. My fault guys plenty tougher than them. Now we get to hear how you could have been a contender.
Which were mostly created for the movie and still operationally functional, as was the set that they created inside a nuclear silo retrofitted to be the biggest water tank for a movie on record. The production was plagued with problems and delays, and Cameron himself would do over 12-hour days underwater, watching the dailies while decompressing in shallow water.
I was already dressed and leaving to go. I'd walk by the tank and I'd look through the window, and he'd still be decompressing underwater, watching yesterday's dailies on his 14th or 15th hour of the day.
Yeah, that sounds a little bit nuts to me, but then again, I'm not as nuts as Jim Cameron saying he'd never want to do it again, and then he goes on to make Titanic, like 2 documentaries about deep sea diving, and then explored underwater filming with Avatar 2. I mean, nobody made you do it, Jim. And then we have the CGI water tendril that really was exceptional in its execution. Like, the final product is pretty flawless, and it also charts a new course for the technology that's now commonplace in films. If you've never seen the movie before, then I think the main takeaway here should be that if you're going to seek out The Abyss, it is imperative that you watch the extended director's cut. This is Lord of the Rings level importance of viewing, where much of the heart and soul and the climax of the film has been removed. It was done for time, but the big chunk of missing footage from the end there is like the button that ties up the thematic plot elements, how humans deal with pressure, our different reactions to something new, how we react to fear, and whether or not we are worth saving as a species. Great movie, a must-watch, and I would go as far as to say that it's pretty much unremakeable. James Cameron is a one-of-a-kind filmmaker, and the circumstances for making the film are never likely to be repeated. The '89 Abyss was shot reel for real, while a remake today would ironically be using the now well-refined technology pioneered in 1989 to less than the best results. Nothing is more real than actually shooting for real in camera, and that is not likely to happen again. But that doesn't mean it can't get adapted into a comic. 2 comics, specifically. And the first comic connection worth mentioning is that the underwater creatures, aliens, whatever we see in the film were designed by none other than Arzak creator, Franco-Belgian artist supreme, Mobius. There are a series of sketches of color pastels on black cardstock which have been printed in the back of the Dark Horse comics along with an article to promote the film. Now, I don't think the art is anything that resonates with me personally in these comics, but Michael Kaluta is a workhorse career comic artist who has left his mark on many series. His work here is packed on each page to accommodate the amount of action needed to tell the story, and his characters are a good representation of the actors. The comic flows like a Tales from the Crypt story where everything is shaved right down and compressed to the bare essentials. It's pretty impressive considering that the movie runs almost 3 hours and this story is tied up in 2 issues. That's 45 pages. The writer Randy Stradley addresses this in the notes at the back of the issue. I was able to effect much of the required compression in the comic script through the device of introducing Bud Brigman as a narrator, though that strategy introduced certain limitations of its own. And in other cases, they had to cut entire scenes, like the opening on the sub. But more interesting, in my opinion, is that unbeknownst to the comic creators that Cameron would ultimately decide to cut his ending for time, and working directly from his script, they left the entire uncut ending as originally intended, which is the only way that anybody would have been able to see the ending for 4 years. This was clearly a commercial tie-in to help promote the movie, and as such, I don't think it merits much consideration otherwise, even if it was a neat little diversion. But what I do think is worth consideration to me is the timing of the book. The Abyss, both comic and movie, are released in 1989. This is the same year that Dark Horse had secured the rights to 20th Century Fox's Predator, and just the year before, Aliens. This leads us to the fan-favorite Alien vs. Predator comics. And Star Wars was another franchise that they were about to get in the next few years. Sin City and Hellboy were a few years out at this point, but this adaptation must have been a stepping stone in building a relationship between Fox and Dark Horse. That was an important relationship for Dark Horse that helped them survive as an independent publisher and even become the 3rd largest publisher for a time after Marvel and DC. I think it's pretty cool that The Abyss had some small hand in that. It's pretty wild to say that any of Cameron's movies is the lesser-known title, but in the sea of aliens and Terminators and Avatars, The Abyss is definitely sidelined, and maybe partly because of not including the Encounters of the Third Kind ending for the theatrical release. In 1989, the wait to video in a pre-internet world, let alone the wait until 1993 for a special edition that would only see a limited theatrical run before hitting video stores, that's a bit of a wait. That might just stunt the impression on the public that it gets. I don't know how many people would have seen the second run. Question for the day. Is The Abyss the smart man's Armageddon, or is Armageddon the dumb guy's Abyss? I'll see you guys next week.